It's hard to believe we're headed down the home stretch of another winter wheat growing season. Looking at where the wheat is at right now, we're just at that flowering stage, as you can see. One question I often get from growers is, what should I do from a nutrient standpoint in the autumn? It's never too early to start thinking about winter wheat planting time. September is right around the corner. So today I want to share with you a few tips of what to keep in mind from a nutrient standpoint with regards to wheat planting in the autumn. One of the first things to consider with regards to nutrient applications with winter wheat in the autumn is that you might be okay doing nothing at all. But before you do anything, make sure you get an up-to-date soil test. This should be the number one priority on your list. Now, that soil test may include a 0 to 8 inch or a 0 to 12 inch soil test. When you consider starter fertilizer applications in the autumn for winter wheat, the first thing to remember is that starter is a practice, not a product. The purpose of starter fertilizer is to give roots early access to nutrients. There are many reasons to consider using a starter fertilizer for wheat. I want you to take a look at the following picture. The picture on the left, you'll notice, is quite variable with regards to the overall wheat stand. The picture on the right is quite uniform. So again, this can be one of the reasons for using starter fertilizer in wheat is you can improve the uniformity of your wheat stand. That picture on the right, every plot has received starter fertilizer. The picture on the left, every plot has not received starter fertilizer. There are also other reasons you might want to consider using a starter fertilizer in winter wheat. One could be to stimulate early growth. This may or may not increase overall yield. Another could be to increase grain yield. Another could be for a little bit greater flexibility for side dressing, or in the case of wheat, your spring N application timing. Another could be micronutrient application. Can be a good time in the autumn. But remember, the focus of autumn starter fertilizer applications on winter wheat is to improve that start right capacity to capitalize on those mid-season environmental conditions. One of the hottest topics in nutrient management happens to be sulfur. Here we're looking at a plot that has received 25 units of sulfate sulfur applied in the fall, along with 100 units of N at green up in the springtime. Notice it does look like we see a little bit of a color response going on. We don't see that great of a difference with regards to row closure. Now compare this plot with the next one we're about to see. Now we're looking at a plot that's received about 30 pounds of N applied in the fall, along with about 25 pounds of sulfate sulfur applied in the fall. What do we notice? One, we notice row closure, much more dense of a wheat canopy. We notice a little bit of a height difference compared to the previous plot that we saw. We also know a little bit of a difference with regards to color. Now the question you might be asking is why? One thing to keep in mind with regards to nitrogen and sulfur is that the more protein or sulfur-bearing compounds produced through increased NNS supply, the greater the NNS requirement. This indirectly applies N to S ratio. So oftentimes when we apply a little bit of N, it may also be a smart move to apply a little bit of sulfur. So as we wrap up here today, we went over a couple different nutrients and there's a couple of take-home points to remember. Where is that starting line with regards to what should I do if I want to have one nutrient management practice in the fall on winter wheat? So, first thing, nitrogen. Consider a pre-plant soil nitrate test. All right, that's typically a 0 to 12 inch soil test that you can get prior to planting winter wheat in the fall. What we have noticed is when that pre-plant nitrate test comes back less than 10 parts per million, we tend to see a better likelihood of seeing a yield response to that autumn N application. With regards to phosphorus, take a look at that 0 to 8 inch initial soil test and how that came back. Remember, with regards to phosphorus, those critical levels are about 30 to 50 parts per million with that Malick 3 phosphorus test. For those of you still on braid, it'd be about 25 to 40 parts per million. If you're in that range, you might be able to get away with just a maintenance application of phosphorus, which would be based on crop removal. Now, potassium can be a little bit different. If you're on a coarse textured soil, which is a CEC of 5 and under, that critical level for potassium is about 100 parts per million Mehlich 3K. If you're on a finer textured soil, which would be a CEC above 5, that critical level becomes about 120 parts per million K. So those would be the two critical levels to keep in mind. Maintenance ranges for potassium would be about 100 to 130 for those coarse textured soils, and about 120 to 170 parts per million for those finer textured soils. We also talked a little bit today about sulfur. Now, something to consider with sulfur is we've seen positive and lack of response to autumn application of sulfur. Oftentimes, if you apply a little bit of N in the fall, you might want to consider a little bit of S application along with that. We talked about that N to S ratio. So we have seen some positive yield responses. Some of that may depend on winter precipitation in between the time of fall application and green up in the spring. So as we come to a close here today, one thing to remember is that if you want to have a great winter wheat stand and you want to have good yield numbers, you have to start right to finish well.